Thank you for watching or listening to this candidate forum. This is one of several conversations among candidates running for a seat on the WBAI local station board. My name is Kate Doran, and I am a volunteer with the League of Women Voters. And I will be your host and moderator this evening. WBAI is a listener-sponsored radio station, one of the 5 stations of the Pacifica Network, the country's first and only independent national radio network. The views expressed during this program are those of the candidates, not of WBAI. All viable candidates have been invited to participate in these discussions. Our format today is that after each candidate introduces themselves, I will put one question to each candidate and let each of the other candidates comment, follow up, or rebut the answer. At the end, each candidate will be allowed a closing statement to make the case for why you should vote for them. We are now going to take 30 seconds each to introduce ourselves to your viewers and listeners. Mr. Finkelstein.
Hi, I'm Steve Finkelstein. I've been a WBAI listener since the 1960s. I'm currently a member of the station's Community Advisory Board, as well as the Pacifica National Board's Technology Task Force. I worked at the station as an engineer, announcer, and freeform radio producer from the late 1960s to the late 1970s. And during my tenure, I was a major participant in the February 1977 action to prevent the station's programming being changed by new management to light talk and music. And in the photograph in the New York Times, that's me holding the microphone while everyone else is barricading the door at the Empire State.
Mr. Andersson, please introduce yourself.
My name is David Andersson. I'm a Sunnyside, Queens resident, and I've been active in the community for over 25 years in New York. I've been the coordinator of the coalition to expand voting rights, to give the right to vote for legal residents in New York City, and I have been the coordinator of Presenza with the press agency to publish in 8 languages all over the world.
My name is Dee Dee Halleck, and it's in 1961. I did a film called Children Make Movies, and I've been trying to help people make their own voices heard ever since that time. So I got acquainted with BAI through Julius Lester, who was a very good friend, and I was the founder of Paper Tiger Television and co-founder of Deep Dish TV and a professor of communication.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Zerbe. I am part of the Red Wave slate. I am a Democratic Socialists of America member in Central Brooklyn. I organize with the Libertarian Socialist Caucus. And I have a background in radio and advertising. I would love to work on projects like that here at WBAI, and I think that's about it.
Thank you. Mr. Heerwagon?
Thank you. William Heerwagon. I've been hanging around as a volunteer, or started hanging around as a volunteer about 14 years ago. I'm a member of the Justice and Unity Campaign running for the local station board. I've been on the LSB before, and I've also been on the PNB. I understand bylaws and things, and I think we can do better.
Mr. De Palma?
Thank you. My name is Jack De Palma. I'm a longtime listener, a member of the CAB for many years, and now on the LSB. I've listened to WBAI all my adult life, and I'm on Social Security now. I'd like to support the Indy caucus candidates, as well as the staff candidates from the Democratic Socialists of America. I endorse no sale, no lease, no signal swap ever for WBAI. We're an independent network, and we have stuff that other people don't have. Thank you very much.
Ms. Albaiti?
Hi, my name is Safia Albaiti, and I'm running with the Red Wave slate. I'm also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I organize with DSA's campaign to elect Bernie Sanders and to do outreach in communities of color here in New York. And I'm a longtime activist around Black Lives Matter. I've also been an activist during the Occupy movement and around Palestine, as well as anti-war issues. And I hope to bring that experience as a Muslim, as a socialist, and to WBAI and its outreach.
Hi, my name is Rosa Palmieri. I'm a member of the Red Wave Slate. I'm also a member of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America. I also organize with No New Jails, New York City. And I'm an actor and a teacher and a visual artist, and I'm a member of Actors Equity Association. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Charlotte Albrecht. I am, again, on the Red Wave Slate and also a member of DSA. I'm a socialist feminist. I've been on many of DSA's equivalents of boards, so I have a vested interest in fostering democratic practices and transparency, and really want to just find a place and maintain a place for left voices in a democratically controlled community radio station like WBAI. It's very inspiring what goes on.
Thank you. We will now move into the question period. Mr. Finkelstein, I would like to start with you, and I'm going to ask about financial issues. In your opinion, how healthy or unhealthy is WBAI financially? How would you describe the financial problems in a nutshell? And how do you propose to start resolving these problems? You have 2 minutes.
The state of the station is financially is very unhealthy. We have a large payment due on a loan coming up shortly, and we did, however, get a bequest recently that will help us out a little bit. The reason that we're so unhealthy is because we recently had to pay a judgment to the Empire State Building Real Estate Trust because of a very exorbitant lease that was signed many, many years ago. And ironically, the person that signed that lease, who was at the time the executive director of Pacifica, is none other than Dan Coughlin, who is now the owner and director of Manhattan Neighborhood, who is now offering to come to our rescue. It reminds me of a volunteer fireman that sets fire so he can come in and be a hero. So I think you have to understand the irony of that when you consider any possible partnership, lease management agreement, public service operating agreement with Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I believe another reason for our financial mishaps is that there is not a really good effort to raise funds. There are many grants, government grants, foundation grants, and various other things, but we really need a development director that's going to go after these things and make them a reality instead of just a pipe dream.
Thank you. Now, each of you will have 1 minute to respond, to comment, to rebut, but if you choose not to, you can simply pass. So, Mr. Andersson.
In my experience, the issue of money, it's mainly an issue of people. So if we could increase the number of listeners, increase membership, and increase the participation of people, we should be able to increase also the fund coming to the radio.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that we really need to focus on making the programming more youth-oriented and more exciting. And I think that I think a lot of the programs that are on are great, and I'm not for cutting anyone off. I just think that we could take advantage of various emergencies as they come up, and because that's a way that people sort of quickly look for news, and that may be some way of increasing the budget.
Because I agree with everything that's been said here. I just wanted to speak for 1 second to what you said about the funds coming in and how they will still fall short according to the research that the Red Wave has done. The funds will only cover probably about $200,000, which would cover about 5 months of expenses that are not coming in. That means 7 months or $280,000 to cover for the rest of the year, just to put a finer point to that.
Okay, thank you. The point originally made about the Empire State Building, the loan made to pay the Empire State Building lawsuit caused a financial problem is not the true story. We were in trouble. BAI was in trouble long before that, and that's what made us owe so much money to the Empire State Building. So it's way off base. And about the grants, at this moment in time, it would be nice to have a development director or someone with such title, but the grants cannot be sought easily now because we don't have our audits done. Once they're done, then grants would be more accessible. Thank you.
I agree with mostly what's been said. I believe that many more programs that bring in youthful listeners that's relevant, but the question is always, who do we appeal to? A lot of people in New York City have a lot of money, but they don't listen to our radio station. We can bring in more listeners with good radio, and some of the suggestions I've been making, some of the things I've been working at for years now, getting off of the Empire State Building was critical, getting off Wall Street was critical, saving money in that way, but we also could get that CPB money again, and that's how we do it. More listeners in the city of New York, we have such a small share. With more good radio, will get us more money in our needs.
Yeah, I agree mostly with my fellow debaters. I think that in the interim we're going to probably have to rely on grants, but I think I have a lot of hope that we are seeing a moment right now where if you build a base of people, small donor contributions have really made a difference in our political climate around the country. It has transformed it. It has given people hope. And the real transition we need to make in WBAI is to, again, find the people who are best represented by a community radio and have them invest in that. And I think we can do that through bringing in more creative workers who work in podcasting and radio, doing more fundraisers. Brooklyn and New York is really the hub and the heart of a lot of this. And I think we can start, it may be ambitious to have a full kind of title for a development director, but I don't think it's impossible. I think we can do that if we generate a lot more different ideas. And I agree, people with money in the city will not want to invest in WBAI because it doesn't represent their interests. We need to find the people who do.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said, Safia. And I think that infusing our programming with reports and with content coming from organizers who are in the front lines of these struggles that are happening in New York, because New York really is the epicenter of this burgeoning left movement. We will see these communities become more of a base of our listeners as people that are representing them and their struggles are actually part of our content.
Yeah, again, I agree with my comrades here, and I do like that we're talking about more than just grants. We're talking about more than just stopgap measures. I think something we've been talking about is that building a community builds investment, and that personal investment leads to monetary investment, because if we improve the giving experience in a way that it's beneficial to both the station and its listeners, that's what's going to sustain it into the future more than a Band-Aid on a problem. I think in general, if we look to the future and we have, like what you mentioned, sort of fundraisers that are bringing lots of different organizations together, it's going to be about like mutually building trust and mutually building money together. I think we all have a lot more ideas about fundraising, but yeah.
All right, thank you. The next question goes to you, Mr. Andersson, and this one is about journalism.
Excuse me, can we rebut We have 1 minute to rebut, do we not?
If you choose to.
Yes,
If you
okay.
choose to, I'll allow that.
So I agree with what everyone else has said except Mr. Heerwagon, and certainly it goes without saying, even though I mentioned grants, it goes without saying that ITPS, it's the programming stupid, that has to be changed. And I do believe that Linda Perry, the current program director, who incidentally was with us back in the 1970s as a public affairs and news producer, and I believe what she's doing now is the right thing. She's actually analyzing the audience for each program, and she's making decisions based on that instead of on any arbitrary type of judgments.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Andersson, this is a question about journalism. What is your understanding of independent journalism? Do you think rules around independent journalism require the board to remain out of editorial decisions around news reporting? Why or why not?
Yes, I believe the board should be out of the decision or the limitation of what the journalists could or could not do. Having said that, I think we should have very clear limitation of concerning violence and concerning discrimination and concerning bullying of people, and also recognize the courage of people who take risk and or give information who the public doesn't necessarily know about it. I'm thinking about Julian Assange. I'm talking about people who have been fighting for the nuclear disarmament. I'm talking about people who have been following the immigrant and the border and so on and so forth. I think that we should give a large space for people to participate.
Thank you.
Journalism is one of the most dangerous occupations internationally. Hundreds of journalists are killed every year. So, and I feel that we need to make contact with journalists around the world to support them, and also use their information. I was one of the founders of the Independent Media Center movement, and it's still alive in certain places like Texas and Philadelphia and another number of other places, and certainly around the world. There's a number of initiatives in Africa that we could make contact with. In terms of, I don't feel that it's the board's job to make editorial decisions. I think that job is the program manager of the station. I feel very strongly about that.
In terms of a definition of independent journalism, I think the simplest way that I could put my thoughts to that is journalism that is given the ability to tell the truth, no matter who that might sort of hurt in power. And I think that it's extremely important, and I think that community radio is uniquely positioned to do that kind of journalism, because it is the responsibility is to the people of the community and not to private interests, foundations that are putting money and therefore influence into the radio sphere. So,
Thank you. Mr. Heerwagon, do you want to comment?
Yeah, just could you, it was a short question, thankfully. Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure
Yes,
it's
certainly,
being addressed.
What is your understanding of independent journalism? Did you listen to what?
Yeah, I don't know that that was answered, but I think, independent journalism would include WBAI. We're sort of independent from everybody else, but people seem to think those are individuals out in the world all on their own. And I think independent journalism, no matter where it comes from, is fantastic. And we can't all be in the image of some group, some network or something. Thank you.
When I was in London, there was a church that we stopped the last day that was shrine to journalists that have been murdered, silenced, shut down. WBAI is a radio station that doesn't do that. We don't have commercials, and I think the big influence that's been mentioned is the idea of commercial, who pays the bills. So the other side of our responsibility to raise money is to keep the voice working, not because we're expecting money, but because there's no other voice around. That was my statement originally on the candidate statement. We do have a responsibility because we are independent, and that responsibility is that we get that information out that's not available elsewise. And I really appreciate what you said, and I endorse what you said. We have to tell the truth to the people of New York City and the United States of America, and I would just raise the idea that we're a network, and sometimes we hear things on our network that is not heard anywhere else, even with the tremendous resources these other networks have, these other people have. We're not the New York Times, we're WBAI.
I think that independent journalism is, again, WBAI has a role to play in terms of being a public trust against corporate influence, against government censorship. That's its role. I think independent journalism is one that brings the stories of those that are often silenced, stories of people who've been most marginalized and oppressed who will not come out. I think WBAI's work with covering the Central Park Five and the egregious injustice that happened to that. There's a reason why that became an award-winning documentary in Netflix, and I think part of that is the role that institutions like WBAI played. And I think it is one that we have a commitment to making sure that we preserve its ability to be able to weather any influences from private interest to try to shape that we have evidence-based journalism that is based in scientific inquiry, and that we uphold that, and that we try to do our best to be to open the media blackout on issues facing people right now with the growth of the far right around the world.
I think, just to echo some of what you said, I think part of our commitment is going to have to be, and maybe this is somewhere where the board can play a role, just because I think you need as many people on top of this as possible. In order to raise marginalized voices, sometimes you have to do actually like a lot of searching for them and really keeping an ear to the ground of what's actually happening. And I think that takes a lot of work, and it should be a commitment not just from the board, but from at every level, in our guests and our hosts and our staff. Everyone should be trying to be in touch with what's actually happening in these communities, and finding voices that haven't been given a place yet.
Yeah, being last being said, I'll get a lot of the good bits. No, I'm kidding. I think that, we've all been addressing the first part of the question. The second part about editorial control, sort of from the LSB. I would love to have conversations about context for that, because I'm not really clear if that's like an issue. But I do think it's something we need to acknowledge, that in an era of fake news, like climate denial, stuff like that, sometimes if you are lifting up the most marginalized voices, like we've been talking about, we also have to worry about misinformation, because that is also a repression of free speech. So yeah, we need to be tuned into that political climate and find any way we can to support independent reporting. A lot of very good independent journalism is happening on WBAI. I've only started listening very recently, but I've been just like majorly impressed.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Andersson, do you care to comment on any of these? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Wait, can...
Okay. Yes, I believe independent journalism is that journalism that's outside the realm of the media conglomerates like 21st Century Fox and News Corp and Cap Cities, ABC, Disney. And I think just today I heard that Viacom re-merged with CB. It's just, it's exemplified by organizations, excuse me, such as ProPublica, the Marshall Project, and places like that. But I don't believe that the board, I agree with Dee Dee, that the board should not get involved in programming. That the board's responsibility is to recommend a program director, and you either have confidence in that program director. If you don't, you hire someone new. But you let that program director make those decisions.
No, no, no.
No further comment from you, Mr. Anderson? All right. All right. The next question is for you, Ms. Halleck. This is about, relates to the Pacifica mission, underrepresented communities. Please define underrepresented communities. How will you reach out to the underrepresented communities as a member of the local station board? How do you plan to work to see that the WBAI airways better reflect our underrepresented communities? And you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think that one of the reasons that Donald Trump has succeeded is that he did reach out to certain working class people who are really struggling in this society. And I think that one of the communities that need to be given voice are certainly working people. And I've often, I don't know if it's still on, there was a wonderful program about the taxi drivers union, which was I used to listen to quite a lot, and I think that kind of programming is something that you have to actually actively seek and make people feel comfortable, and it a lot has to do with even like the place, the office, the spaces, if they're welcoming. A lot of times people are intimidated by technology and who aren't on a regular basis using technology. I think I've been very impressed with Brick, actually, how cheerful and welcoming it is here. And I think that that is something that I think of children. There's nothing on BAI for children. When I was in Yellow Springs at Antioch, I was on WYSO, reading children's books every Saturday morning in 1957 and 58. So I think it might be fun to have a children's show.
I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Ms. Albrecht begin.
Oh, no,
with
because
the comments.
we did it.
With the comments, and then we'll go this way.
But, okay. I was not really prepared to talk now, but that's fine. Can I go to Rosa and then come back? I was
fine with that. Okay. So. Well, first, I was actually on the way here thinking, oh, we should have programming for children. That would be great. But also, I think, I think I've said a lot of what would help us reach marginalized communities, which I think is getting in touch with organizers at the front lines of these struggles. But I also think, I think a lot of these communities are already making their own content. Especially communities that speak other languages, immigrant communities, people of color, and I think we can raise up that content and find ways to partner with those, with maybe it's a podcast, and connect with them and see where we can help them and they can help us. So I think that would be, I think being aware that a lot of that is already happening, and it's just a lot of reaching out that needs to happen from us.
Are you
okay,
ready?
Yes. Sorry, was lost in thought. Yeah, I think it's really important to stress that people are already out there doing this stuff. We can be a conduit for that, a lightning rod. We can teach people things about their jobs, like the taxi workers union, about tenant organizing, about any number of issues, and these things are already occurring. And I think, you know, we're talking about the LSB here, and I think that sort of like facilitating a relationship in which we get feedback about, you know, what people think of what's on and what they'd really like to see is super important, because we have you know, we have the space for this, and it's a unique institution in that it is, you know, democratic beyond what we hear on any of the other airwaves.
Thank you. Ms. Albaiti, if you would like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, there is a flowering of podcasts on all sorts of things, including children's literature and social justice, like how to do social justice parenting and all sorts of things. And I think the big question is, why has WBAI sort of missed out on that? And I think this is really the moment where the board has to have a transformational kind of approach to how to reach people. And I think one thing we could do is community town halls, finding people who are not only frontline organizers, but are doing this work where they have live tapings and, you know, all sorts of different communities bringing out their content right now. I think bilingual programming, or even more, has to be part of our vision. Only 50% of New Yorkers speak only English at home. This is a necessity for our ability to grow, but also to be accountable to the communities where community radio really matters. And so I think that we have the potential to do that through these sort of town halls, through the outreach we have, and through doing deep research into what content is already out there. How do we, as WBAI, offer terrestrial radio as something unique and significant for people to plug into?
Thank you. Mr. Palma?
When I first started listening to WBAI, the issue was the Vietnam War. I still believe in nuclear disarmament. I think climate change is a serious issue. Our radio station should represent the taxi drivers, as we did the joggers, the Central Park jogger situation. People that are that they use improperly use the justice system against people is one of the things I've noticed in New York City all my life. My wife always tells me that I'm a bad witness for a lot of these things because I am a white guy with blue eyes, and you know I'm okay off and the like, educated, etc., etc. But everything that's been said, I think we should have more children's shows. They will bring on a lot more listeners, and parents will help their children gain knowledge about literature and things like that. And we have to deliver the truth because it's underrepresented in the media, and that's bike riders, the gag show, taxi. That taxi show was excellent, as you said. We have a lot of people that want to listen to us, and we have to give them what they need to hear.
Thank you. Mr. Heerwagon?
Thank you. Reaching out to underserved communities. I liked what I heard on this end of the table, especially Ms. Palmieri, that there are, and I didn't even realize this myself, there are organizations, groups that are putting out their own information now with the internet and videos and who knows what else that I don't know about. But in order to do that kind of outreach, you need the LSB to be able to do something. And this current regime that's been around 10, 11 years disbanded all the committees except finance, and we once had a membership, outreach, and finance committee. Thank you.
Mr. Zerbe?
Because all of my comrades at the other table have already talked about the programming, I think one of the things that you said that I think was really important is the idea of welcoming space. And we're talking about terrestrial radio here. We obviously have digital, but we still have a home base in Brooklyn. There is still a tower in Manhattan. And I think that the thing that we also need to focus on, not just with programming, is events and actually touching our communities out in the real world. So I think that is the other half of the promoting voices. It's also being able to bring people into our family.
Thank you. Mr. Finkelstein?
Yes, traditionally WBAI has always had programs aimed at underrepresented communities, but we've never been proactive. We've always been reactive. The reason we have programs about the criminal justice system is because Eddie Ellis came to us and said, hey, I want to do a show. Programs about Native Americans because 40 or 50 years ago, Frank Hardrow and Suzanne Schoen came and said, I want to do a show about this. The reason we don't have children's program is because no children have come to us and said, hey, we've got a program we'd like to do. So BAI has to be proactive and reach out to these groups, and then we'll have programs that represent every specter of the audience.
Mr. Andersson?
If I could help, I was founder of the Center of Culture in Jackson High, and I work with a Bangladeshi community, I work with a Nepali community, we organize mock election, we organize surveys, and be able to translate and find link to be able to have it, the program in English and languages. So, I mean, but the work has to be done, and we need to be on the ground to be able to do it. But it's, I mean, maybe with the Chinese, with the World Journal, we could do a collaboration. But yeah, it would be very happy.
Now, Ms. Halleck, do you care to comment on?
Well, I just endorse the mention of Eddie Ellis, who I worked with in making a film called The Last Graduation, and I think it was our producer on there who suggested to Eddie that he should have a show on BAI. So there was some outreach also, and I think it's a very important show because I know if prisoners are allowed radios, those who are do listen to that show. It's the only program that really addresses prisoners.
Right. We are up to question number 4 from Mr. Zerbe. This one is about policy. What areas of policy do you think are most in need of development, and what would you prioritize to improve station operations and functionality?
This is a tough one. I think that, of course, the answer depends on how you define the question. So I'll define it by saying I think one of the main things that needs to be done is making the membership and the sort of digital experience one that is easier to understand and engage with. What I mean by that is getting onto the website to listen, to see what's going on, and then to join and, you know, put your money where your ideas are, your ideals are. So I had some struggles with that when I was trying to join. And I think that making that something easier for people who are engaged at events when they're listening, something that's easy to plug into, is absolutely a number one priority for me.
Policy on a local level that I'd be concerned about is the policy or actual practices, there is no policy, around how programming is done. It's now willy-nilly, and you come and go at one or two persons' wish. And sometime back, many years ago, we had something called the Program Council before the current majority went along with getting rid of the unpaid staff union. So there's lots of work that could be done in that area. Thank you.
I agree with you about the policy issues. We have to streamline the way in which people can get to the radio station, support the radio station. I also kind of would suggest that the LSB is not meant to encourage or turn the dial on the programming. What we do with the programming is we encourage the people that know the programming. And I like the idea that Linda Perry's been doing some really good work with the programming. I would only suggest that the policy that we should have is that we should try to keep the responsibility of honest and community-based radio going. It's not an easy thing to do because New York City is a very diverse community, and we have a lot of different things going on at the radio station which are really good because of policy, because we are that voice of New York City that's never heard anywhere else. Thank you.
Just want to go back to the last round. I think you mentioned, our committees not really not being set up the right way, and I think really starting from that, making sure all of our, membership, outreach committees, other things actually get set up, and finding ways where, web development and improvement on that, making it easier for people to donate to WBAI. I think we lose a lot of donors because of the way things are set up at the moment. There's no easy, streamlined way to do things, and I think finding a way to make sure that we have easier ways to connect podcasts that do decide to come on board if we change the content and make sure that WBAI is really kind of the heart and the home base of that, so that it is seen as the voice of people, of New Yorkers. Right now, I don't think that's the case. I think people are very disaffected with WNYC, and they're very, but they're searching for something. They're not finding it, and I think part of the problem is we're not making it easier for them.
Yeah, the main thing that comes to mind for me is more transparency, and I think that can happen through a website that's more easily navigated, and also more of a social media presence so that people can ask questions easily online as well, and we can update people like more readily on what the board is up to, and also staff, and they can engage on Facebook, on Twitter, on various platforms where they feel comfortable, and I think that would help. That would help with transparency.
Yeah, I think that is also what came to mind when talking about policy. I think, something that's worked really well in DSA is we have working groups. We have little separate groups of people that share an affinity for a certain cause or a certain function within the organization. And it is easy to be a part of that, to be a part of the conversation and to get things done. I know that we are supposed to have town halls with the membership. I know that we've been talking so much about fundraising and that there could be a committee for that. As someone who's new to this, I recognize that I don't have all the history, but it does seem very difficult to get involved. If I was a person who just was like, hey, I love this station, how could I suggest to the listener board or to the general manager that I have an idea for my organization to partner in a fundraiser? I think everything should go through proper democratic channels and be clearly laid out objectives and structures voted on by the board. But we really need that period of community feedback. I also don't know if there is a way for listeners to communicate directly with LSB, and I'd love for that to be possible.
Thank you.
Well, I think the problem is that there's not enough policy, and people are just pretty much doing what they want to the detriment of the station. And one of the things I wrote about in my statement on the website, and it's pretty pet peeve, is there's no policy about the air sound. Right now, you go on the air, people go on the air, and some of these shows sound like Wayne's World. They're being done from somebody's basement or rec room. And back in the 70s, we had a policy, and we had like a training course, and you could not be on the air unless you took and passed this training course and was certified and knew how to operate the equipment. And that's what we need again to bring the level of the air sound up to professional standards.
Mr. Anderson, do you?
Yeah, so to go on that line, I worked during the Occupy movement with the people who were on the command, and I think it will be very interesting to see WBAI like a command and be able to define groups who can make sure and qualify the people on what is a project of WBAI and really see how can we improve programming and how to improve quality of the program, but seeing not too much as a policy but more as a are we working together to achieve this goal.
I agree that we need more transparency and more connection with the viewers, the listeners. Except that the only thing we really reach out to them is to get money from them. So I think I don't know, more events. I know they used to have these crafts fairs and things like that, making people get together. I think that it is. I keep hearing New York. Actually, the signal goes to New Jersey. Nobody's mentioned New Jersey, and also Connecticut, and also the web. And I think that we should. That's a whole other area that we could really reach out more to, and try to connect with people on the web.
Mr. Zerbe, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I love the idea of having training courses for sound regulations. When I worked in radio during college, we had the same. That was a number of years ago, but I absolutely understand and agree with having sort of some really easy standards to teach and then to be able to hit. And not only that, but keep people accountable for continuing to hit them and not just, disappearing into the woodwork.
Thank you. We're going to move on. Question number 5. Back to money. This is about asset sales. In 1999, one of the issues which fueled the crisis was the consideration by the then National Board to sell one or more of the 5 Pacifica stations. Do you consider selling one or more of the 5 Pacifica stations as an option to resolve financial problems? If yes, why? And if no, why not?
No, of course not. I don't think there's anybody except a couple of people that are no longer on the boards, but that back some of my friends here, said anything about wanting to sell the station or the entire network. I think it's an absurd idea. I mean, we have to stay here. And selling the station or even buildings, as they mortgaged California and Texas buildings last year, and now we have to try to figure out how to pay them off. But we caused the problem here, our people that have been in charge here, by getting so behind on all our bills and not knowing how to do good programming and not knowing how to raise funds. Therefore, we ended up owing a couple $1 million, and in the end, with fees and other things, $3.2 million loan that we still don't know how we're going to pay off. But Pacifica doesn't know how it's going to pay it off. It took on that obligation. That's it. Thank you.
We should never go back economically. There was a point in the past when New York City had a church, and we could have maybe gotten a hold of that as property, real property. But the signals, the radio stations themselves can't be sold, swapped, or gotten rid of without the whole membership of the whole Pacifica network getting involved. The problem is that we also can't, be bankrupt. We can't be broke. And so part of the process over the last 20 years that I've been listening is that we were wealthy, we had money, we had a lot of listeners, but that we didn't capitalize on it. They spent money back in 2000. And we developed a few things that kind of disappeared, and at the same time, we signed contracts that gave the balloon payment that led to the Empire State Building debt, and the other stations in the network aren't doing as well, maybe as Berkeley and New York City, but we have an obligation to remember that we don't want to go backwards, and I would never sell, swap, or lease anything having to do with the network. WBAI or any of the other stations.
Thank you. Ms. Albaiti?
Those of us on Red Wave are completely opposed to sale of any assets, and I think we're very cognizant that even though we don't have enough of the history of the station, that we're in a moment right now where we definitely feel as though privatization and opposition to it in among the American people is something that you can rally people around. And I think that what's going to really transform things is rebuilding the listenership, not depending on one or two benevolent, rich individuals to get us out of the crisis, or a sale to private institutions, but really doing the hard work of rebuilding our base among people and making unions, making worker centers, tenant organizations see and if they can partner up with us in a much more serious way, and for us to really rely on building that base of people. And I think we have a real hope right now. Unions are revitalizing. People thought they were dead 30 years ago. They're coming back. I think public radio, a community radio that's owned by us democratically is here to stay as well.
I agree with everything you just said, and I feel like you covered it for me, so I'm gonna pass.
Okay, yeah. I also agree. I think that I don't want to sell WBAI. I think that WBAI already has some strong assets. Like we said, this is grounded in real life. This is terrestrial radio. We have an airwave that reaches so many people. We have the infrastructure. It just needs to be utilized. And rather than surrender any kind of autonomy to an institution, a private institution, what we need to do is, we've been referencing sort of this growing network of independent media producers, workers' cooperatives, stuff that's already out there. And we could become a leading force for worker-owned and independently funded media instead of being a part of, you know, like a cog in the private and nonprofit industrial complex.
Mr. Finkelstein?
No, BAI should certainly not sell any of its assets. And I'm someone who remembers that what a sad day it was when we had to sell this church, which studios we built from the ground up practically. And it was named the Robert M. Goodman Memorial Broadcast Center because Andrew Goodman's father, Robert Goodman, who was a member of the board, and Goodman from Goodman, Schreiner, and Cheney, he's the one that convinced us, you have to buy this. And it was like in that Pearl Buck's book, The Good Earth, you always hold on to the land. You never get rid of the land. Okay, and I think WBAI's even current situation began back then. That was the beginning of the end. That was when BAI started declining and moving from one place to the next, and just they've been a nomad ever since.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, I will be opposed to any sale of WBAI or any Pacifica radio.
I have an example of a terrible sale, which was the War Resisters League building, the A.J. Musty building, which Paper Tiger and Deep Dish and DSA, a number of groups, the War Resisters League, of course, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, all had a base there. And it was sold, and they've moved from one place to another, and all of those groups have been weakened by that move. It really was the wrong move. So I am completely against the sale of the buildings, and especially the sale of the license for the airwaves.
You asked a question earlier about independent journalism, and I think that keeping WBAI as part of the network that it is in and keeping it democratically controlled by its community is essential to that independent journalism. So with the rest of the Red Wave slate, I am absolutely and wholeheartedly against any sale of any assets.
Thanks. Mr. Heerwagon, do you want
Yeah,
to?
here to that. And I just want to say that I've talked about committees, but we have a national board also. We're part of Pacifica, and one of the allies of the people that are in control now said on air, you could find it, it was broadcast, a live broadcast meeting, that WBAI and perhaps WPFW, we should consider making them repeater stations, which means that we just get stuff from California and Texas. And then my neighbor here said that some stations aren't doing as well as Berkeley or New York City. Well, New York City isn't doing well at all. We may be making a little bit more money than before, but we're failing by at least $500,000 every year. Thank you.
All right. Question number 6. We'll change it up again. Move from money to programming. Do you think that WBAI's policies and procedures for making programming decisions and for program evaluation are working in a fair, collaborative, and respectful manner? If you do, describe what seems to work well. And if you don't think so, what policies and/or procedures do you propose that might lead to better meeting that standard? And you have 2 minutes, sir.
We could always do better, of course. In fact, in the absence of a radio station that's independent and progressive-minded in New York City, we can do a whole lot better. However, we're the only game in town for independent and progressive radio, or even television. Occasionally I watch CUNY. I have access to all the cable and all the different things, so I can see anything I want. I can't even get free speech TV in New York City, at least I don't know where to find it, even though I look all the time. And most of the time I'm searching for the information that I can't get on other radio stations, other television stations, other cable channels. I don't even read the paper because of what they did with the Iraq War. So I'm of the opinion that what we have to do if we want to advise programming is let the people that, as was mentioned, I think Linda Perry's been doing a wonderful job taking us from where we were losing listenership and producing and developing programs that are really addressing things. I listen to the Bicycle Show. I'm a cyclist occasionally. I listen to the Gays Against Guns. I think guns are the biggest issue that we could turn into a massive issue in New York City. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people that don't hear WBAI. So the idea is that our programming has to address the local, the base of the people in New York City with a trusting message that unifies them. The union is part of it. I support the United Federation of Teachers and all union movements because that's how they've destroyed good media. That's how they've destroyed people in the United States working together in a democratic or in a social fashion. And if we endorse that type of thinking, we can't fail.
Thank you. Ms. Albaiti?
Yeah, I don't know that I agree that we are the only game in town. The only reason I say that is because I think that the majority of people are tuned out because they're so disgusted by the lies on corporate media, the lies that they hear, the misinformation campaigns, the apologetics for Wall Street and the 1% on NPR and the New York Times and so on. What they've done is they've created their own content and they're sort of that independent progressive media can be found, but it'll be found on the internet, be found in different podcasts. I think the role that we play, I think that what WBAI does the best is really sticking to the kind of content that brings the lives of Black New Yorkers, a contribution to debates around reparations that are some of the strongest that you'll find anywhere. And I think that bringing the voices of formerly incarcerated people to the front. I think that we could always do better by bringing in and connecting the new energy that we find elsewhere and telling people that the best place to bring it is to see WBAI as a source for that outlet.
Yeah, I think the more we can help people who are already creating this content see that by coming together we can all be made stronger, and that if we're able to lift each other up in that way and make these, it might even help these different various struggles make connections with each other and rise together in that way. And I think I would like to say that Red Slate, I think, has a lot of connections to not only socialist politicians like AOC and Julia Salazar and Tiffany Caban, although we'll see. She'll do great things in other places. And we also have connections to popular podcasts and journalists. And I think we can bring these people together and help create more programming that reflects these communities.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add about what sort of programming I'd like to see. I think that the question is about policies and procedures and how they relate to programming, and I think my real answer would be I don't know what those policies and procedures are really well enough to answer. It seems kind of like I don't know, sorry, I feel like I'm messing up this question, but I'm not clear how programming decisions are made, and I think all of us on the Red Wave Slate feel that we have a lot of good connections that we want to utilize, but until and if any of us were elected to the board, it's hard to say how exactly we can use those connections to benefit WBAI and its constituency.
Well, I think program decisions are finally being made on a rational basis. As I said before, I think Linda is doing a wonderful job. We're not going ahead and saying, well, we think we have an audience here, we think we have an audience there. We're taking a page from the commercial radio playbook, and we're looking at Arbitron ratings, and we're looking at, and we can tell exactly how many people are listening in any particular hour. And that's how programs decisions should be made. Now, it's not to say that, I mean, there are some shows that have been on for years and years and years, and we're finding out they have an audience of like 500 people, okay? Now, it's not to say that there are certain programs that need to be on regardless of what they have. They you know, like the criminal justice program, which does a lot of people, but if it didn't, it would still require a lot of, you know, it still need to be on. But I think now we're finally making decisions, and obviously people who are losing their programs don't like it, but there's a rational reason for what is happening and how it's being done.
For me, it's a very important question because that's a little bit why I'm candidate. With Presenza, we work in 40 countries, and we have collaborators and correspondents in 35 in English, and could contribute to have an international network of contributors to what happened yesterday in Argentina with the election, where Macri lost 20% in the vote. I mean, I think that contribution could be very interesting and could help the programming and people in New York City. You have a lot of people from Argentina in New York City, and from South America or from Europe, and could have news on, could be on nuclear, what's happening in Germany, and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
To me, the basic policy is the First Amendment, which was fought for and maintained, and BAI had an incredibly important role with George Carlin in making that First Amendment be part of their policy. And we're up again. I feel that people should recognize that one person who wants to get control of BAI I had to go to the Supreme Court in a case where he basically, because of the Kavanaugh and the right-wing judges there, we lost 5-4, but that his basic premise was that public access is private, that it does not need to have a public forum, and that they could censor whoever they want. And I think we have to be very careful that we stick to the one radio station that could actually voice the truth when it's difficult. Mr. Zerbe?
I think that most of my Slate comrades have touched on a lot of what we have to say, and I think what Charlotte said is one of the most important things, which is that we have not been deeply involved in WBAI's most inner workings and programming decisions yet, and that's something that we are excited to be part of if we are elected to the board. So I don't think I'll waste too much time.
All right. Mr. Heerwagon?
Being that I forgot what the question was and everybody changes the subject, I pass.
Are you sure? I'll repeat the question for you if you like.
Yeah,
All
that'd be
right.
great.
This is about local station boards and their connection to programming.
Okay.
And do you think the policies and procedures currently for making programming decisions are fair, collaborative, and respectful?
Well,
That was the question.
Obviously, the answer is no. Nothing's fair, reciprocal, etc. There's one person, maybe with a couple of backers, making decisions. You may like some of the decisions, you may not like them, but the procedure is no good. I think I addressed it earlier. We used to have something called a program council, and there was another thing I wanted to say about it, the programming, but I don't. People that run for boards and get on boards are interested in programming, and they probably want either a show for themselves or one of their friends or just somebody they like. That's not what the LSB is about. We're not supposed to be involved in the actual programming. But to answer the initial question, no, it's not fair and compatible and everything right now. there's no policy. Thank you.
Mr. De Palma, would you like to
Yes.
make a final comment about all this?
What Ms. Halleck said is the best embodiment of what WBAI ever was to me all my life. It's the free speech radio station. What she mentioned, what was mentioned about George Carlin is just an example of how easy it is for people to, you know, if you're the President of the United States, you could say that word, but we can't on our radio station. I would make a recommendation to everybody here. Listen all the time. And then go talk to Bertol or go talk to Linda. Because that's how I did it. And I listen to when Linda tells me, what do you like about that? What don't you like about that? And I tell her what I think. And she tells me I'm wrong. So policy and process will drive the information they need about what we listen to, which will inform the Arbitron ratings, I hope. And so a democratic decision will drive good content, I believe, is how we have to go. And it should be based upon recognizing that everybody has a right to say what they want on our airways. It's got to be responsible, and it's got to be respectful. With this is New York City. This is New York
But it's
City.
also New Jersey and
Yeah, and Connecticut as well. This is New York City.
Okay. All right, thank you. Everyone had their chance to comment on that question. We're going to a new question for Ms. Albaiti. Fundraising. Should one of the roles of the local station board be amplifying fundraising? If not, why not? And if yes, what is your fundraising strategy or approach?
I mean, I think it's critical at this point. It's a kind of all hands on deck. I think that's part of the reason why we're all running, is to be able to reshape it. Everything falls on fundraising at this point. I think the question really, and the questions that seem to underlie tension and you know, is really about the method of that. I think we'll go back and say that our slate is very much invested in being able to defend publicly owned radio and as community radio, and being able to build up our base among people who don't really recognize WBAI as an institution they want to invest in right now. We know, in DSA how critical it is to have a membership-run organization, to have people pay their dues, to see an organization transform and actually do things, and we kind of want to see the same for WBAI. Once people actually see, new energy coming into a WBAI, I think, and feel as though it is a place where their content can be represented and represented fairly. I think that that will bring and attract more people to it. I think there's things that we can do immediately. Again, finding ways to make it easier for people to donate to us, having live tapings and live shows of our content, of radio shows, in hubs of where that happens, especially in Brooklyn and so on. Making sure that we can put together maybe package deals with other podcasts, so people know that if they want to contribute to the content in one podcast, they're also helping to raise funds for WBAI, explaining why that's necessary. I think really those are going to be the mechanisms right now where that I think that this board needs to do a lot of work into making that happen.
Ms. Palmieri, you have a minute.
Yeah, I see fundraising as an opportunity also for us, as we have these different maybe external social events and things like that, to connect to our base and to hear more of what they're looking for, what they want, which will in turn, I think, make them want to contribute more. And also to, I think, to bring together that community, which is what I think we offer, and what our purpose is to bring together these communities so that they can better know each other and fight together, not fight against each other, but fight in the struggles. And I think that will also, we can uphold these values in the businesses we partner with, and we should put emphasis on partnering with co-ops and FSAs, community spaces, and offer perks that come from those spaces rather than corporate spaces.
Yeah, pick up where you left off. It's definitely a part of what we were talking about when it comes to an overhaul of the website. As a socialist, I hate to use the word branding, but there we have it. Everything needs to just be a little more clear for the giving experience. You know, the WBAI Buddy program, I've heard people talk about that as a way to support institutional giving. Those sort of things that Rosa was mentioning is going to be a lot more valuable to people in the community than a Zipcar membership. I think also to the question of how involved the board should be, again, it's one of those things where I have to throw my hands up a little bit, but I do think that the purpose isn't to centralize decision making on such a small body. The purpose is to facilitate decision making among the community, I believe. But I think that maybe localizing some of this conversation to a smaller group of board members would not necessarily be a bad thing, as long as they were facilitating with others. And any kind of working group around finances, which I believe already exists, should also include listeners and producers. Done.
Thank you.
Well, traditionally and historically, the boards of nonprofit organizations have always had a role in fundraising, and the role is usually that they donated large sums of money themselves because they were wealthy people, and they had wealthy friends who they had donate large sums of money. And that was true of WBAI back in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and probably up until the governance plan was changed to have an elected board. Now that's no longer the case. I'm sure most people on the board are not what we called back then fat cats that could afford to donate large amounts of money, but they still can play a role in giving us ideas and themselves implementing plans to raise some money. You know, perhaps having some sort of benefit and stuff like that. They can, you know, if not, like I said, they can not donate the money themselves, but figure out how to raise money. Plan a benefit, for instance. That's always a good way to raise money.
All right, Mr. Anderson?
No, I agree. I mean, two sides. One, it's to improve the experience for people to be able to donate to WBI, and two, for the board member to be active into raising money through benefit and so on.
Right. Yeah, I think I have had a lot of experience trying to fundraising for Paper Tiger and Deep Dish, and I think I could offer some ideas. I would really caution CPB funding. There's been a lot of history about that, which I could explain later, but it definitely comes with strings attached, and I think that's one thing we have to be, and it is a government entity, and so we have to be careful. I definitely think that the best way is what the original founders said, that this is a listener-sponsored radio station, and I hope we can make programming that listeners want to pay for.
All right, thank you.
Obviously, with a listener-sponsored radio station, you have lots of on-air time dedicated to getting money, and I think that any efforts that we make going forward should be dedicated to getting money in without spending more time on the air asking for money. That means digital things like we've talked about. It means partnering for events. It means having BAI buddy partnerships that make sense for the community. I was surprised also to see Zipcar when I logged in there as the first thing, and you know, as I was scrolling through, was looking for things like, or hoping to see things like CSAs and local co-ops, organizations, even places that rent space, as now there are a lot of places around New York. And when we're talking about activism, we're always in need of space. And I think those are the things that would resonate with the communities that we're talking about reflecting.
Mr. Heerwagon?
Thank you. In regard to the LSB being involved in fundraising, obviously it's part of their duty to seek fundraising and to make sure that the station can function. It's otherwise why would we be a board? So all the things mentioned, that traditional things and maybe some slightly new things, and then in the future get back to grants if we ever get our audits up to date. These are all good things. And the LSB does need to be involved. And like I said, we used to have a membership outreach and finance committee. Yeah, it's years ago. That's been disbanded by the people that have been in control and let us get down to where we are now, where we're barely existing. Thank you.
We have to respect the model, and I really appreciate what you said. For years I was told CPB money was something we wanted to get back to. I originally heard the message, that's government money, maybe we don't want to take government money. We could have more books, authors come in. Tom Hartman did something with Leonard Lope. Volunteers made the premiums go out in the mail. I worked with the volunteers for years and years, and I want to recommend that's a wonderful way that we can do work for the radio station. We want to have a listener-sponsored radio station, and we want to buddy up with worker-owned organizations, of course unions. We want to get more union voices on our air. Co-ops are a great idea. Sometimes they're not such a great idea because they have their own thing. We're not public, we're Pacifica. But the fact is that I think of ourselves as being public. And we have to pay our bills, like I said, respect the model, get our premiums out on time, have events, book fundraising events are great. They used to have famous people come forward. We had Bob Dylan on our air before anybody else did. It's a big name. We just went back to the Clearwater. Pete Seeger's a wonderful representative of our radio station. And of course, like I said, we have a lot of ways, what David Rothenberg does with the plays, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of ways we can make our radio station turn a dime.
Ms. Albaiti, if you want to make a final comment about all the other comments, or
I'm
not?
good, thanks.
All right. All right. To Ms. Palmieri, member rights. What do you think are the practical implications of membership rights with respect to the station's decision-making process?
Well, since we are completely dependent on our listeners and our members, I think that they should have as much impact on decisions we make in programming and funding and policy as we can encourage from them. And I do think it's going to take a lot of encouragement because I think we have to. Our programming has to have real stakes for them if they're going to be engaged and if they're going to care about the decisions we're making. So I think it goes back to like strong programming again, so that they want to be engaged. But also I think there's ways that we can be more transparent, as I talked a little bit about before, and also have external social events and town halls and forums. Also, even holding straw polls so that they can actually like vote and express their opinion on important policy decisions we're making or funding decisions. I think those are all ways that we can encourage them to exercise their rights. And I think that the more we have these things, the more the communities themselves will help us find ways for them to also to be, how do I say this, to be democratically involved. I think there's a lot of ways that we haven't even figured out yet that this can be more of a shared decision-making process.
Yeah, I think one thing that Rosa just briefly touched on, an idea that she had, was holding listener socials, like, sort of things where you're mingling with the board and with the show producers, the people that you listen to all the time and want to hang out with. I think also, as we've experienced many times in DSA, democracy is super messy. We don't get to experience it as a country. We don't really know what it's like. So, it's kind of a grand experiment, and, what's interesting about this is it is actually a very solid representation of something where you elect people to represent you, to make decisions for a community. And if it would be possible to make the board more functional, I think the members would want to participate more. And it's all about sort of, you do have to, people aren't just going to come to you, you do have to encourage that very actively.
Okay, Mr. Finkelstein?
Well, I remember years ago when subscribers would call, we called them subscribers back then, not members, would call and complain about something and say, I'm a subscriber, I pay, whatever, $15, why don't you listen to me? And I used to point out to them that the station was listener-sponsored, not listener-programmed. And there are many ways that they can get involved now, certainly by being a part of the Community Advisory Board, by running for the local station board as we do, all sorts of participating in town halls, which we're going to have pretty soon. But essentially the programming should be left up to the program director. Okay? As I said, if people don't think the program director is doing his or her job, there are remedies for that. But as far as, and members certainly can write letters, and now with social media we have, BAI has has a website, has social media pages, all sorts of Facebook groups. They can express their preferences and dislikes there. And that's pretty much the way it should be.
That's an interesting challenge because first I think we need to be able to listen and do something with the participation of the member, and if we want to increase that number, we need to be able to face the challenges of be able to listen to and be able to do something with what we listen to. But at the same time, it cannot be a power game on programming and so on and so forth. So we need to encourage participation, we need to encourage listening, and we need to be able to have the programming go the flow of the programming.
Thank you.
I think the key words are transparency and accountability, and I think that it's very important that we try to even make the financial situation really make people aware of that in a way that's just not haggling them for money, but that maybe other people may have some ideas of ways that maybe to use the new internet in ways that might, like Craigslist. I don't know if there's some way, but I think that it's the access to information that we have should also be available to the members if they ask or if they want to get it. So I think that is one of the problems that happened to me in public access when I, with Dan Coughlin's board, when I tried to ask questions. They didn't want to have any questions.
Mr. Zerbe, do you want to comment?
Sure. I think that the answer to the question of member rights is twofold. We need to give them first a reason to engage, and second, the ability to engage. That means obviously programming and events and the things that we've talked about for a while this evening that they want to be a part of, and then making it easy and systematic to engage with. To the points earlier, we have all of these digital channels with which you can speak to us, but I would guess that they're not all watched by the same person or group of people, that those things kind of can get lost in the cracks, and I think being able to give a very easy and clear system to the people that we are trying to engage with, whether that's online or in person, is absolutely paramount to actually engaging with them.
Member rights. Of course, they have the right to vote. They have the right to listen. They have the right to give money. They have all kinds of rights that they just get by being a listener. But they have right for information. Sure, once in a while we hear reports from management or reports from so-and-so, but I've heard people here talk about town hall meetings. In the last 10 years, it's a little over 10 years, 2009, when Anthony Riddle was moved aside and Bernard White was fired and other people were gotten rid of, and eventually a year later they got me off the air. They've only had one town hall meeting. That was to introduce the person who came in 2009 to cause all that damage. And the year that the majority boycotted, 2016, my group, I think, had a town hall meeting. And that's Justice and Unity. We had a town hall, sponsored a town hall meeting as the functioning LSB, since the other side wasn't even coming to meetings. And that's it. There's been no town hall meetings. And the people that we're dealing with, that are in control now, have no respect for the listeners. They just want power.
Thank you, Mr. Heerwagon.
Worthwhile radio is passive, but membership is active. Having rights means you have an opinion that's valued and respected. 2009 is a long time ago. We used to put out a folio. We now have an online folio, which is good. You want listener input, but it's very hard to get listeners. Being part of the CAD for years, 2-3 years, we invited people to come, and very few people came. But the listeners own this in the respect that I have for what you folks are saying. And looking back ain't going to get us where we got to go. We do want to have active membership that does a variety of things. Number one, listen, and that should make you happy. And if it doesn't make you happy, complain, of course. But the other side of it is making those suggestions that will be respected is real important. And I believe that there are a lot of people at the radio station now that I've talked to that respect what we are doing here and what has gone on in the last couple of years. And I believe that, having a listener ownership is a very, very good concept.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Ms. Albaiti?
I think strengthening member rights will strengthen the station. I think members have the rights to fact check for accuracy in reporting. That we will try at least to make WBAI represent the stories that are not getting told, and that if we do it right, our listeners will suggest stuff for us to cover, which they've done before. Which WBAI that was what it was doing, and I think that's what membership engagement and membership rights will look like. And I think what you start to do is really try to help facilitate those kinds of in-person meetings or hubs of spaces where people feel like they are part of something bigger. Now that could take time. That would mean actually doing the town halls and doing them right, making them cultural hubs, making them exciting to be in. That would mean reaching out to advocacy organizations to kind of be like, what are your issues? And we're here to talk about them on air. That I think is the two-way relationship we want to build.
Thank you. And would you like to make a comment on all the other comments?
No, I'm all right.
Okay. All right, we've reached the last question for Ms. Albrecht. What makes WBAI Pacifica unique when compared to other listener-supported radio stations?
Yeah, I think this ties well with another question that was also sent out about the difference between public radio and community radio. I think what makes it different is frankly where the money comes from. It's in the name. It's, listener supported is also in the name of NPR, but there's things besides listeners that support those kinds of institutions. I think that means that the programming on WBAI is very unique. I don't know another place that would really have a show that some of our comrades work on, Revolutions Per Minute on, where we highlight the struggles of local struggles and socialist organizing and organizing otherwise that's going on in the city. So I think that it's sort of one of those things where the content follows the structure, and the structure kind of follows the content, and it also has such a rich history, which I've spent hours trying to learn about, and it's honestly very inspiring, all the things people have been talking about George Carlin and the Central Park Five, and like various legal struggles. So I don't know if that answered the question, but
Well, we're trying to find out what makes WBAI unique. That's the question.
okay, I feel good about that then.
Okay. All right. Mr. Finkelstein?
Well, what makes WBAI unique, I think, is its mission, Pacifica's mission, Lou Hill's vision for a station. And although it's certainly been branded in the press and everywhere else as a left-wing station, that was not its purpose. Its purpose was to open it up to all sorts of ideas. We had Ayn Rand on the station. We had William Buckley on the station. So I think that's what makes it unique. It takes no particular political slant. It officially does not endorse any political opinion. Individual programs might, but Pacifica doesn't and WBAI doesn't. And I think it has to remain that way. And that was the reason for listener sponsorship. And I remember I used to pitch, and I used to be able to proudly say, we don't take government money, we don't take corporate money, we don't take foundation money, except for small family foundations. But we can't do that anymore, and we don't do that. And I think that's a loss. But that was one of the unique things about Pacifica and WBAI.
Yeah, I would say it's the age of what could do WBAI on this content, on this position, on this guest, on this investigation than no other radio or TV will do in New York City from so long and in permanent situation. So that's really what makes WBAI so special.
Ms. Halleck, would you care to comment?
Yeah, I think back at one of the things that I heard on BAI Live. It's been quoted a lot, but people don't even realize it was live on BAI. Was when Fidel came to the General Assembly and Che Guevara was there. There was a press conference and I was listening. And they were talking with Che about how to organize and how to organize in cities, and people were looking for something very specific, like, what should we use, barricades or what? And he said, I'll never forget it. He said it in Spanish, and then it was translated. He said, at the risk of seeming ridiculous, the most important thing is love. And I think we have to make a radio station where that is true.
I met a guy named Bruce who came to the General Assembly of the Libertarian Socialist Caucus that I'm a member of within the DSA. And when he found out that I was working on a project with the Red Wave slate for WBAI, he said to me, "Oh, WBAI, I know them. That's one of the most important things that radicalized me." And I have never heard anyone say that about NPR, about WNYC, about any of the other radio stations that I have worked at or listened to throughout my life. So talking to him, he was a doctor, a pediatrician who has worked all over the world trying to save lives. Now he's back here organizing, and I think that really summed up the uniqueness of WBAI to me, that would have been his very first response.
That's good.
Yes, WBAI, Pacifica are unique. We ended up with a situation being controlled by bylaws, which many thought were good, many are now trying to overturn, and I just think that being listener sponsored and trying to govern ourselves, which nobody else ever tried to do, and everybody thinks that all other people outside of Pacifica think it's pretty weird that we have this. Even our recent executive director, who they got rid of, thought the way we behaved was pretty strange. He came from public communications, radio and television background, but they got rid of him. He had too many ideas. I think we are unique, and we should stay unique, and programming is important. It's not the only thing, but we have to be independent. That word was mentioned here, and Pacifica must remain unique. Thanks.
You.
Public versus community. I say community, not public. Sometimes the public doesn't quite get what's going on in the commune. We need arts. We need to spread the love, as Ms. Halleck said. She's absolutely right. WBAI radicalized me when I heard the Yip-In at Grand Central Station. Different events. Recently, they had a celebration of the Young Lords, and they said some things on that radio show that were very, very enlightening about how we don't care about that and that. Just see if you can clean up the streets, if you could, and feed the children sometimes. Make the schools work. These are the big problems our society has, but nobody's addressing them. We have to hear more about what's needed by the common man in New York City. I was very much involved when they were on Wall Street with the Occupy Wall Street movement. We took a microphone over there and had people actually talking to the people in the commune, in that community. Free speech, arts, Pacifica, and check the archives out. There's some great stuff there.
Thank you, Mr. Palma. Ms. Albaiti?
I think BAI is unique because it has this history and it has preserved it. And I think I know there's been a lot. It's really overwhelming to think about how you start, but we're also living in a reality where a number of small newspapers and media outlets have been shuttered because they weren't able to make it, because they were driven out and bankrupted by corporate interests around the country, or because people tried to drive them out because they had good investigative journalism and they had to be silenced. And I think BAI still stands out, and it's still holding ground, and it's doing so now when people are feeling more and more disaffected with the mainstream media, when they're hungry for deeper journalism with integrity. So I feel as though it's very clear that people are disaffected with outlets like NPR. The difference or the direction is still unclear, and I think we have a real role to play to bring BAI back to its heights.
I also want to echo it's an honor, honestly, to be here with everyone and who have been part of this rich history. It's an honor, and I think that as part of a national network in New York, we can really influence also how other boards are run and how other stations influence their communities. And I think that's unique for WBAI to be both very local and in touch with what's happening locally, but also to have this reach nationally.
Thank you. Ms. Albrecht, do you want to make a
No,
comment
I
on
know.
all the other comments?
No, that was great. Thank you.
All right. All right. So we've reached the end of the questioning section of the forum. Everyone's had a question to tackle. And now it is time for your closing comments. Each candidate will get a minute to convince the listeners of WBAI why they should vote for you. So we'll start with you, Mr. Finkelstein.
Okay, once again, my name is Steve Finkelstein, and one of the reasons you should vote for me is to show that this election can't be bought. The next few days, you'll be getting all sorts of glossy mailers and email blasts telling you who to vote for. And these cost money, and they're being put out by people that can afford it. And just, you need to show these people that no, they're not going to, they're not going to dictate who you're going to vote for. But the other reason, and and I think you also, need to pretty much look at everyone's bio and listen to these debates and make a decision among, by yourself, okay? But the other reason is that I and my slate have pledged not to vigorously oppose any sale, lease, swap, whatever you want to call it, because that would be disastrous to WBAI. And we know where the other slate, JUC, stands, but we don't know where the Red Wave stands. So I'm asking each of you as we go around, will you pledge that you will vigorously oppose any sale, lease, frequency swap, lease management agreement, public service operation, anything that would put this station in the hands or under the influence of MNN, Van Cotland, or anybody else?
Thank you, Mr. Finkelstein. Mr. Anderson.
My name is David Andersson, as we mentioned before, and I'm very honored to be part of this panel and to be a candidate for the local board of WBAI. And my contribution will be to help with the network of people we have all over the world with Presenza, to contribute to help to get the news from different points, and to also give my experience with diverse community in New York City, in Queens, and contribute to have more live and engaging programs or direct shows or news from different communities. Thank you very much.
I'm Dee Dee Halleck, and I have been working for 60 years trying to democratize communication and bring voices to share with each other. And I've done that through Paper Tiger, through Deep Dish, in the Independent Media Center, and also through my classes in communication at the University of California, San Diego. And I feel that I can help. I think BAI needs help. I feel so actually hopeful hearing all people's discussions today. It's been very touching and very different than what I thought it was going to be. And I really appreciate that we are getting so many young candidates. That's really lovely, and I hope to work with you all to really ensure that BAI continues long into the 2002.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zerbe?
My name is Zerbe. I am part of the Red Wave slate. As I said before, I oppose all cheap and easy ways to make money. That's all of the different and confusing ways of selling, renting, leasing, borrowing out the assets that we have. This slate is dedicated to having programming and operations that reflect the needs of the community. My own personal interests, as you may have gathered from some of the questions and answers here, are in fundraising and getting our name out to all of the many, many people that should be wishing that they had a tote bag from us and not just from other radio stations around New York City. So that's my personal goal, is to get a tote bag in every house. Please vote for me and the Red Wave.
Mr. Heerwagon?
Hello. I asked if I could read this from my cell phone, and I got permission to do so. WBAI is in trouble, and it will take all of us to save it. I'm William Heerwagon. I've been on the LSB before. I know and follow our bylaws, and I believe WBAI can help change our world. Please vote for me and the other Justice and Unity candidates. Join Rita Marksman, who supports our desire to build a responsible board that won't boycott its own station, that will annually evaluate management using measurable goals, that will invite participation by ordinary station members instead of killing committees, and will ensure respectful treatment of staff and community. We're at justiceunity.org. That's justiceunity.org.
Thank you, sir.
you.
I wonder how many people remember Steve Post saying, "Reach out and touch the radio." We have to trust the community because democracy is the best way. My actions in the past, in the last 5 years, I did everything I could to support WBAI, and I respect what you said. You're absolutely right. This is very serious, and this is very. It edifies us. It makes us honorable in my eyes to be associated with the Pacifica Network, the Pacifica mission, and the people here. Ms. Halleck, of course. Steve, when I met Steve, I was shocked. Steve has institutional history, memory, and understanding. So I'm against the sale, the swap, or the lease of the radio station. I want to get the network strong, and the community of the United States and New York City is what I'm interested in. Justice is preferred. Let's keep it working.
I'm Safia Albaiti, vote for the Red Wave slate. We are against any swap, lease, or sale, period. We're also members of Democratic Socialists of America. We are committed to fighting for a better world that is a socialist world where, the last 6 months we fought for alongside others and we won some of the strongest tenant protections in New York State in the last 35 years. We're trying to revive our unions for the first time in 40 years. We're fighting for a Green New Deal and nationalization of all of our industries and public control. And WBAI is part of that vision of transforming our society so that it's owned by us. So that's why I think you should vote for us. You can find out more about us and our platform at redwavewbai.org.
I'm Rosa Palmieri, and I'm also with the Red Wave slate. Please vote for us. And I think you should support us because we're organized. We're part of the Democratic Socialists of America, and that is part of this incredible growing left movement, and it's growing because we're organized and we're using all these creative different new ways to encourage democracy and to build a base, which is what also needs to happen for WBAI. And yes, we definitely pledge no sale, no swap, no lease, no M&N.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'll echo a lot of what my comrades already said. I think, the just very briefly, the question of MNN was incredibly confusing to all of us trying to figure it out. I want to be able to work with, if elected, sort of anyone involved in any conversation, but what concerned us a lot was any surrendering of autonomy. I read up on Ms. Halleck's court case, too, being censored by NNN, and it being declared a private institution. And as socialists against privatization, we're against privatization of the station. I think, to me, one of my priorities is maintaining internal democracy, so that we can become one of those leading forces in worker-owned and independently operated institutions such as this one. And yes, we're organizers, we have connections, we have experience with some of this stuff, but a lot of it is so new to me. But I promise you I'm a fast learner, and I'm really into building relationships. So vote for me, Charlotte Albrecht, and the Red Wave slate.
Thank you
so
all
much,
very,
Sue.
very much.
The League of Women
Thank
Voters.
Thank you very much. This was lengthy. Everyone was very, very patient, and we hope you listeners have appreciated this conversation. Please visit the WBAI website to watch or listen to the other candidate conversations which are available to you. The views expressed during this program are those of the candidates, not of WBAI. Ballots will be sent to all WBAI members on August 15th and need to be returned by October 15th. Please visit elections.pacifica.org for more information on the WBAI election. Thank you again very much.
Thank you.